Welcome to Fearless Sweater Making, a digital course designed to help you create gorgeous garments you'll wear and love. Well, hello there. I'm Hannah Thyssen-Howard. I have worked in the yarn industry for a long time, and I have a big passion for our materials, inspiration, and the relationship with our crafting projects. I knit and crochet and have made quite a few garments. In fact, they're some of my favorite things to make, and here are some reasons why. Sweaters are a long-term commitment project. They take as long as they take, but they also make my smaller projects like hats, mittens, and socks feel like they go faster. They're also the ultimate learning project. Through making a garment, you'll gain new understanding of techniques in construction, reading your stitches, and reading patterns. Making a sweater that fits, that you can wear and show off, is a huge feeling of accomplishment, and the process of making gets us connected to our craft and materials in new ways. There's no better way than making your own clothes to have a wardrobe you love and wear. Through making sweaters, you'll learn how to customize every garment to be exactly what you envisioned. There's an opportunity here for endless versatility with yarn weights and textures, garment shapes, and beautiful colors. I understand that knitting or crocheting a garment can seem a little scary. You might have heard stories from other crafters about being stuck on Sleeve Island, or getting bored with endless stockinette, or maybe even crying about how many stitches they have to chain or cast on. All these things are super easy to overcome with just a few tricks. And you might even learn to like parts of the process you previously hated, like swatching. In this course, I'll share my process for starting, working through, and finishing a sweater, and hopefully you'll walk away with the confidence to tackle your own sweater dreams. Sometimes I think the best way to start talking about sweaters is to show you a few of my own. Each sweater I make has a special story, special yarn, and little things I learned from the process. I'm going to show you a few of the sweaters in my at-home stack and tell you about what did and didn't work for me with each pattern. First up is Rindy Jane. This pattern is by Ellen Mason. Ellen is also a sewing pattern designer, and she uses an unusual PDF structure where she nests all the sizes into the same pattern. When you download the pattern, you can select out the pages that are relevant to your size and get rid of a lot of those random parentheses that clutter up the page and add to confusion. I love knitting this sweater. I use my own hand-spun yarn, but I don't feel the fit is that flattering on my body shape. I think I need a deeper V. Morchella is a cardigan by Whitney Hayward, and it's one of my most worn knitted items. This project helped me realize that I really like wearing cardigans a lot more than pullovers. I reach for this all the time in winter, and I love all the little details Whitney put into this piece, like the fold-over button band. It makes the finished garment feel so professional. The yarn I use here is Harrisville Designs Sheer Line, which highlights different sheep breeds with each run. I use the CVM Rommeldale for this garment. This yarn is woolen spun, so it's super lightweight even though it's warm. This sweater is basically perfect, no complaints. Technicolor Dream Sweater is a fun one. If you've got a second, go ahead and look up the original pattern by Stephen West so you can see all the modifications I made. The original is more cropped and features some fringe that you make by leaving your ends out for this scrappy sweater. I got a little more controlled with my color choices by using hand spun that I mirrored on each side instead of lots of little bits, but I also significantly lengthened this sweater to make it more of a tunic. I wear this a lot at wool shows because people always ask me about it. The Farmhouse Cardigan from Amy Christoffers is a classic, and it's dear to me because it has so many memories wrapped up in it. The yarn is from a pop-up in New York for Starcroft Fiber, which is a very special yarn company and farm in Down East, Maine. The story is really great. Basically, the sheep live on an island, and their fleeces are softly washed by the sea all year long. They eat seaweed. They don't interact with humans, except a few times a year when the Starcroft team shows up to shear them or breed them or check them for health. The rest of the time, these sheep are totally wild. I remember hearing this story, then choosing this soft watercolory blue to make my sweater. I partnered it with the sweetest ceramic buttons from Jenny the Potter, little cats on them. I got one year at Rhinebeck. This sweater doesn't get worn as much as I like. It's too warm, but I will never ever let it go. Weekender is next. This Andrea Mowry pattern is so popular, it's likely that you haven't made one already. You know at least 2 other crafters who have, and I'm one of them. I made mine out of some yarn I picked up from the Oopsie bin at Harrisville Designs. It's Brooklyn Tweed Shelter, but in an accidental color mix. It's like too purple to be one of the colors. The yarn is lovely, the pattern was easy, but the fit is just not for me. I realized that I really need to think about what's going on under my sweater when I'm wearing it. This yarn is a little too rough for me to wear next to skin, so I have to wear it with something else. But the pattern has a boat neck, which means you can constantly see whatever is under my sweater. I won't be knitting any more boat necks and heavier yarns since I always have to wear an undershirt. Coffee hour, I know, it's one of my own designs. This one is from Seasonal Slow Knitting and I just love it. I wear it every winter. It's sweatshirt style comfy and it's super woolly and warm and just everything I wanted it to be. I think this is the design I'm most proud of ever creating. The fit is a dolman, but it's deep enough with a long enough body that you can function. It's like wearing a blanket in big cushy piece fleece yarn. This is one of my favorites and the pattern is super easy. I wanted to design something that felt simple but was also very wearable and attractive. The next sweater here is Leela. This design is from Carrie Bostick Hoge and it's got a lovely hemline. That curve in the front and back is achieved with short row shaping and I love the way it comes down and just makes me look a little bit longer without losing my curves. I made this one with handspun. All my handspun sweaters are my favorites. The last one I'm going to show you is another from my second book. Friendship Bracelet Cardigan. Raglans, like this sweater, are very simple to knit, but they're super complex to design. And I definitely learned that in the process of designing this sweater. My tech editor had to do an overtime on this one, but it's good now that it's published. I love the all over moss stitch, which is a celebration of one of my favorite stitches. I know a few of you are groaning. Don't worry, I'm not making you knit anything in moss stitch or crochet any moss stitch today. I wanted to put a lot of special details in it since that's something I love about the patterns I make. So these little Latvian braids on the cuffs are stacked to feel like the friendship bracelets that you collect at summer camp from all your friends. Just a little nod to how much my friendships through craft mean to me. If there's anything I really learned making each and every one of those sweaters, it's that it helps me to have a really strong set of goals in mind before I start planning a garment. I ask myself 3 questions. Does it suit my style and fit preferences? For example, no boat necks. I like a longer hemline, split hems, curved hems. I like longer sleeves. But what do you pin tons of images of? What do you buy and wear over and over? What do you wish you could buy? Then evaluate what you perceive that you want versus what you know you'll actually wear. Be honest with yourself about how shapes feel on you and look on you in reality. This is not the same as choosing a shawl project or a mitten project or a hat project. This is something that covers more of your body and you're going to want to think about how you're going to wear it. Do I have a yarn I'll love working with? If I'm looking for cables, do I have something round already in stash or in mind? If I'm going to make a really plain stitch for the body, do I have a yarn that will keep me captivated even if the stitches are boring? Or do I need to buy something to make this garment happen? Does it fill a need or a purpose? Ultimately, this is, am I going to wear it? I can knit or crochet anything I want, and you probably can too, but that doesn't mean we should. I probably wouldn't end up wearing a super frilly lace weight sweater with lots of ruffles. So I probably won't knit one because I don't have a need for it. Making your own garments is sustainable, but only if you're actually using them or giving them to someone who's using them. I love how utilitarian craft can be, and it's important for me to make things that have a purpose. In my view, there are basically 2 ways to plan for garment making. You can either plan materials first, which I call yarn forward, or you can plan from the garment out, which is pattern forward. Both are viable, so I'm just going to show you how I personally would work through both of these routes so that you have a path to follow for your own project. So first we're going to talk about the yarn forward approach. There are a couple different steps in the yarn forward approach, and we're just going to go over each of them, but they are listed here. First, swatching. Do you routinely make gauge swatches? What about swatches larger than 5 inches by 5 inches? If the answer is no, you're not alone, but you need to start thinking about making a larger swatch. Taking gauge is one of the most dreaded parts of sweater or garment knitting. Most folks don't like being stalled out making a swatch when they just want to cast on, but gauge is actually my favorite part. Knitting the swatch or crocheting the swatch in the recommended gauge, even if you know it will be too large or too small, is a good measurement for where you need to go. Don't be afraid of using the yarn up in your swatches. You can unravel it even after it's been washed and blocked. This does not matter, but it's such a huge fear for a lot of crafters. Roughing a yarn up actually mimics better all the handling you're going to do of this project in the process. And gauge is really important. For every inch that you're off in gauge, that equals space that you're off in your finished garment. A gauge of 5 stitches per inch might seem okay at 5.5 stitches per inch, but suddenly that means for every 2 inches you're adding an additional inch. That means your 40-inch sweater suddenly becomes a 44-inch sweater. So you want to get as close as you can to the correct gauge every time. And if your row gauge doesn't match, but your stitch does, try to see if roughing it up a bit or pulling on it in blocking helps because you can mimic that through wear. I like to do something I call the single skein library. I buy yarns that are readily available, and I pick up one skein before I buy the whole sweater lot. When that skein arrives, I spend a lot of time getting to know it. It's a small single investment, but in the long term, I can swatch with it on a bunch of different needle sizes. I can play with textures and find out, does it do well with cables, lace, does it need a simple stitch? Think of the single skein as a blind date before going all in on the long-term relationship that is a sweater. Auditioning yarns for your sweater before committing to the whole lot. If it doesn't work for the garment you have in mind, you aren't out as much yarn money, and you can save the leftovers to swatch with later for another garment. Keep good records. If you want to save yourself time later by labeling your past swatches in a way that you can understand. Some crafters add yarn overs or holes that designate what size the needle was they used into the swatch. I personally feel like a tie-on jewelry tag is the best solution for me. I just tie it with the label and the needle size and type, wood, metal, etc., because that does change your gauge, so I can reference it later. Your gauge is the same yarn and the same needle size is probably not going to change a lot over time, so you can keep referencing it. After I make the project, if I'm not going to use the yarn again, I turn those swatches into cat toys or coasters or little scent sachets. Lastly, you're going to have to accept the results. I have a friend who I love so much who is always sending me her crafting questions. One of the things she asks me the most is, can I fix this pattern to work with this yarn? Sometimes yarns are wildly different gauges, like a fingering weight to a worsted weight. These types of changes are possible if you're really good at math, have a lot of personal time, you like to rip out and redo to make edits. That's just a little too much for me, so I say pick a direction and stick with it. If you want to use a yarn, find the pattern that fits that yarn. If you want to use a pattern, find a yarn that fits that pattern. Don't try to force a square peg in a round hole and give yourself more headaches. I tend to be a pattern-forward crafter and a yarn-forward designer. When I'm coming up with ideas from scratch, I like to let the material lead me, but when I'm going with someone else's idea, I look for the right yarn to make it exactly what I want. That doesn't mean I have to go out and buy something every time. It's totally possible to look and stash for things. We can start by taking a look at the yarn used in the existing pattern. Patterns are designed to sell yarn, so the designer should have made a good pattern and yarn match when planning the garment. That said, sometimes we want to make changes. We might love the fit and the shape, but we want to see it in a soft neutral instead of wild speckle, so that's when you would substitute a yarn. If you have a large stash, you can kind of experiment with what you have at home. But many crafters, even people who have been stashing for a long time, might not have a lot of sweater lots on hand, especially if you don't make a lot of sweaters. This means that you may need to buy yarn for a sweater that will make you happy and work within the existing confines of the pattern. When you don't know where to start, the website Yarn Substitutions is a wonderful beginning. This site recommends similarly textured yarns and doesn't just base the comparisons on needle size and material. A woolen spun yarn often has woolen spun yarns suggested, so you know where to begin in your search for the perfect yarn option. Again, like any other sweater purchase, I recommend starting with a single skein and then buying your sweater lot later. It's always worth it to spend $16 now to save $160 in the future that won't become anything. Last but not least, be open-minded. I'm going to let you in on a secret. When someone designs a yarn label, they're often just looking up the weight, adding the CYC, that's the Craft Yarn Council, specifications for gauge, and filling in the needle recommendations. Companies that are releasing several yarns a year don't always have someone on staff with time to swatch. And I'm not saying they never swatch, I'm just saying that when you work in the industry for a while, estimation becomes a little easier. Just because a yarn label says knit on size US 4 to 6 needles doesn't mean you're going to hate the fabric on a 3 or a 7. Swatching is the best way to try this out and play with your gauge. I like to look at a few different places. I find ideas in magazines or from my current wardrobe. Hello, cashmere sweater with multiple mends. I might see a picture on Pinterest or discover a pattern on Ravelry. When narrowing down all the beautiful things in the world to just one project to start, I ask myself some questions. What do I already love? I know I love cardigans. I know I love texture. I don't mind repetitive stitches. I like a sleeve that's long enough and cozy to pull down and tight enough to push the cuff up. What would I buy if I had endless cash? I'd probably buy some really nice basic pieces in luxury fibers. Well, guess what? I can make that. What is missing? Basics. I buy a lot of crazy stuff. I love a good print. But what I wish I had was more cardigans in neutral colors to go with more things. Why do I like this garment or idea? What elements are catching my eye and what makes it feel special? Would I wear it as is? Would I make any changes? Longer sleeves, shorter hemline, different material? When you're the one making it, you're also in charge of making all these decisions. Okay, time for a practical exercise. Let's go through both pathways and I can show you how I work through building a project pattern forward or yarn forward. We're going to start with pattern forward. First, we need some inspiration. So I picked this photo from Pinterest that has no listed source. Now, I could Google image search, but it'll probably lead me to similar garments or something I can't afford. AI can be pretty dumb sometimes, so I like to rely on good old-fashioned Ravelry searches. If you don't use Ravelry, you can kind of do something similar via Pinterest search, but it's going to take you a little longer, just because Pinterest is really geared towards selling you things, not towards you making them. First, let's talk about the goals here. What do I love about this piece? I like the big defined stitches. To me, they look very handmade and cozy and floaty. I think this is probably 1x1 ribbing or brioche stitch. The yarn looks a little uneven, which makes the stitches feel a little warbly, which I think is nice. Pockets. I love this kangaroo pocket. I honestly don't know what to do with my hands half the time, so this is perfect. A deep V neck. I find these more flattering on me, and it's kind of harder to find knitting patterns with a very deep V. I love the oversized fit. I like to be cozy. Yes, I know I look like a walking blanket, but I do not care. I am cold. So I'm going to do a Ravelry advanced search, and I'm going to look for any term I can modify to get results close to this inspiration image. I'm going to look at the yarn weight, the little details, the fit, who the pattern's for. I'm going to need a photo. Make sure you're using all the checkboxes on that advanced search page. And if you don't know where to find advanced search on Ravelry, just go to any page. It's right there at the top and you can sort by patterns. Don't forget to make sure the pattern is available. There's nothing sadder than discovering the pattern you want is discontinued or unpublished. Also, check for errata. Those are mistakes that the designer or testers or other crafters have caught, and they might be helpful to you. Don't just count on the pattern to be up to date. Also, take some time and look through the other project notes to make sure there's nothing glaring from other users, like, I wish I had never started this sweater, it's ruining my life. With a lot of narrowing down, I found some garments that are pretty close to my original inspiration. Fool's Paradise from Wool Addicts is a similar texture, but there aren't any pockets. I don't love that it uses a cotton yarn because that means if subbing in, I should probably use another cotton or linen, something with minimal stretch to keep the structure. There also aren't many projects to reference, only 5. And inclusive sizing is pretty important to me. I think more designers should be doing it, and the sizing is really limited on this one. 26919 by Lane Yarns is pretty cute and close to what I'm looking for, but again, no pockets. I could probably fix that though. It uses an alpaca blend yarn, which means a lot of drape and probably a lot of stretching. The model looks kind of like she's stretching it out now, actively, in the photo. There are no other projects to reference, and again, really limited sizing, so not the best results, but let's keep looking. I decided to go through my favorites, patterns I've already saved because I like them, to see if there was anything similar that I could maybe modify, and I found 2 results. This is why favorites and bundling features are great on Ravelry because you can reference things you may have forgotten about that you saved later. Osprey is by Jacqueline Selziak, and I know that this pattern is going to be well written and size inclusive. It's got 100 plus projects to reference, uses a wool yarn, big bonus, and it's got brioche. I'd really rather not do brioche. I'm not the best at taking out errors in brioche, and this feels like a big project to try and fix. The Dartmouth V-neck by Kadri seems like a better option, even though the body is stockinette and not ribbed. It uses a mohair and silk blend, which is kind of in between with stretchiness. Maybe not 100% what I'll be using, but that's what swatches are for. I can test for that. It's got a good sizing range and about 60 projects to reference, and I love the structure of the V-neck. It didn't show up in my initial search because I've been looking for ribbed garments and at a different gauge, but this piece fits the closest to the way I'd want it to. So the Dartmouth V-neck is going to be my jumping off point for this knockoff. It has all the details I wanted, a deep V with some structure, an oversized fit. It has a drop shoulder instead of a raglan, but that's okay, and I'll need to make some little changes if I want it to look more like the picture, swapping in more ribbing, maybe going up a size to compensate for the hugging that will create, adding pockets, maybe even taking some stitches in at the cuff to get that poet sleeve look. But that's a lot easier than risking making a pattern that hasn't been made many times or hasn't even been tested, like with those first few options. Now we'll have to figure out what yarns I could use for this piece. The original is listed on the Ravelry page. La Mana Premia and La Mana Como Grande. They're double stranded together to give a halo and added warmth, but I live in the southeastern USA. I'm probably warm enough. So I'm going to leave the mohair out and look for yarn that will fill the gaps that it's creating with the halo. I always like to check yarnsub.com to get a better picture of a yarn since they collect their own data and don't necessarily use the same designations as Ravelry for weight. For example, Ravelry says that this yarn is a bulky yarn, but YarnSub looks at the gauge and says it's actually a heavy worsted, maybe more of an Aran weight. The manufacturer says the yarn is super light, which makes me think it might be woolen spun for a really lofty piece. I'm thinking I could probably just use a wool with a lot of bloom to make up the difference of the mohair. So I found a few in the suggested substitution list that I already know. Out of these, I think the best choice would probably be the 3-ply Morehouse Merino. It's super fluffy and light, and I happen to know the farmer, which is always an added bonus. So what if we want to go yarn first? Performing this task in reverse is actually so much easier because you're already working in a set of parameters. This is one of the reasons that I build a single skein library, so I can audition yarns for patterns that interest me before buying a whole sweater lot. Here you can see all the details I collected on Quince & Co. Finch yarn, a yarn I happen to have in stash. Here are some things to notice about this yarn. Multiple plies are going to add structure to soft yarns like merino, so they hold up better to wear. Roundness means high stitch definition. That means it's good for cables, lace, and textures. Heathery colors probably need some bigger motifs, so bigger cables, or simple stitches so they don't compete with the texture and detail and make it get lost in the pattern. Is the yarn you're looking at even something you want to use for a garment? Not every yarn is garment ready or garment worthy. Sometimes they're just not the right structure to fit with your idea, and that's okay. Again, think about how you'll be wearing the garment. Is it soft enough for your skin, or are you going to have an underlayer? And if you have an underlayer, will you need to size up to make room for it? Is the yarn structured to hold up? Are you willing to shave your single ply sweater a few times per season? If the answer is no, consider buying something with more plies or a tighter twist. Think about textures you're hoping to match. If you love the look of a boucle, you need to buy a boucle yarn. If you want a sweater with a halo, you'll need a fiber that has a halo too, like alpaca, angora, or mohair. What elements do you need to achieve your dream results? Last, look at the colors available. If you've got a color in stash that you bought and you'd wear as a hat and not as a sweater, make sure there is a color in the line that you'll wear as a sweater before you go through all the trouble of swatching. Guys, I have a confession. Swatching has become my favorite thing to do. No, I'm completely serious. I actually love swatching because it gives me time to get to know my yarn. It's like taking a car for a trial run or going on a first date. If it doesn't work out for me in a short dose, it's not going to work for me as a whole garment. Start by working up a swatch at the suggested gauge for your pattern or the one listed on your label if you're going yarn forward. Then wash it. When you wash, give it a good wash. Use warm or hot water, let it soak, and then when it's cool, swish it around a little. Squeeze it out, smooth it flat. It's going to get some wear, so see how it looks after a little roughen up. After it's dry, measure your swatch and don't get sad if you have to edit. You can knit another one, or you can unravel and remake it in the same yarn. Go up if you have too many stitches per inch, or down in hook or needle size for too few. If your row gauge is off, but your stitch gauge is on, determine how that might change what you do with the pattern. If it's super fitted, you really want to be exactly on gauge. If it's more loose, you can add some length here or there to make it work. Stitch gauge is a little more work to edit, so I recommend trying to get that dead on. A little off is a lot off over several stitches. For example, 1/8 of an inch too big on your 4x4 swatch adds a full inch over the course of 32 stitches. If you're serious about sweater knitting, but feel like needles are the most daunting aspect for you, it's 100% worth it to go in on a set of interchangeables. Not only are interchangeable needles super versatile for all your projects, but they also guarantee that you'll always have the needle size you need on hand for sweaters. If you're like me and you already have a lot of needles, you might consider buying a set just to use for sweater knitting and nothing else. Otherwise, you could be just like me and have needles in too many projects and always be hunting for your US 8 40-inch circular. A stitch holder or stitch cord is often something that's super helpful to have. I love the line by Coco Knits that is really designed for sweater knitting and also sweater design. Other essential tools for sweater making include space and tools for finishing. Blunt, curved tip tapestry needles are my favorite for seaming up and weaving in ends or attaching buttons. Get all your tools together, make them easy to find. Keep all the yarn for your finished garment in the same bag as the end process garment, even if you need to put one bag inside of another bag. Otherwise, you will move the yarn and the garment apart, and they may never see each other again, and then you would be searching for a single skein of yellow-green to knit the final front that you know you have, but you just can't find. Let's talk a little bit about pattern prep. Going through your pattern before you begin is essential to sweater knitting success. Print out or make a copy of your pattern to use as you work, even if you're intending to use a digital version for most of your crafting. There are going to be areas of the pattern to highlight and emphasize so you don't miss them. At the same time, for instance, is a little line that has the potential to throw a huge wrench in your plans. Take your time in difficult sections and stop trying to speed knit and multitask. Slow down. I'm really telling myself this more than telling you this because it's a constant problem for me. Look for headers throughout the pattern that identify the different starting and stopping points. Look for those key phrases like simultaneously that indicate that you need to do more than one thing at a time or read through more of the pattern. Underline these areas so you don't miss them when you're going back through. Look for duplicates like sleeves and check to see if they're mirrored or identical. This is especially important with lace cables and decorative pieces. Highlight gauge and write your gauge directly under or in the margin of the pattern. This helps me remember what needle size or hook size I got gauge on, and I do the same for the yarn chosen versus the recommended yarn if I made any changes there. It's good in case you want to make the same thing again. I also highlight the size I'm choosing to make throughout the pattern, not just on the first page, or sometimes I circle it. This will help you always keep track of the stitch counts, things for your specific size that you're supposed to be checking throughout without having to count over each time in the parentheses. Look up techniques that you don't know before starting and familiarize yourself with the new ones. You can also look up other folks' projects on Ravelry and read the notes. That way you can avoid any errata that you might not be aware of. Our size. Measuring your own body can be pretty awkward, I get it. I don't like getting on the scale either, but you don't have to do it with an audience. Get a soft tape measure and measure all the same parts of the pattern, the schematic references, to see which size is going to fit you best. Don't forget about ease. Ease is the wiggle room that you have in a garment. So if a pattern says 8 inches of ease recommended, and then the schematic has a size 36 and a size 44, and I measure at the 36, I want to add 8 inches to my size. So I'll either be knitting the 44 or maybe a 46 if there is one. The schematic shows you the physical sweater size, not how it's going to fit you specifically. The most important pattern measurements are the back and shoulder width and the bust circumference, but you might also want to take your time to look at the bicep measurement, which can be surprisingly tight in many patterns. Okay, I know, it's a lot of stuff, but you can totally break it up, and then it's just like any other project. Making a sleeve is a lot like making a scarf or a really tall, weird hat. Making the back piece is like making a wonky blanket. When you take it in smaller bites, it's really not that hard. Mark points in the pattern that can be sectional goals. If the sweater is pieced, maybe start with the smallest piece first to get your feet wet. Alternatively, you can also simplify some issues if you know you already have them. I have a really bad habit of forgetting how long anything is supposed to be and over lengthening pieces. So I've got like a 14-inch left front and a 14.5 long right front and a 15-inch back. And that doesn't really come together cohesively. So if I'm working a bunch of pieces to the same length, sometimes I'll use everything on the same needle, kind of a 2 at a time method for knitting the main body, and it helps keep me on track. Objects like stitch counters can be really helpful too. Do what works for you with other projects and you'll succeed with sweaters. Why is frogging such a dirty word? It's because we feel bad about wasting our time and energy, but I'm going to tell you a secret. You're not really wasting time when you're spending it with yarn. Any moment that you can spend more time touching fiber is a good moment. Unravel if that's what you need to do. Did you know that you can unravel and revive and reuse your yarns multiple times? If the pattern isn't turning out how you want, the fit is wrong, you want to make some changes, unravel. Wind your yarn back into ball stews later, or into skeins so that it can be washed and restored to your shelves. The yarn we're working with is meant to be durable for garments, and if it can't withstand a little frogging and washing, you don't want it anyway. Don't be afraid of mistakes because that's how we learn. Do you know a knitter who always works without a pattern? In today's modern internet world, it can seem kind of unthinkable that someone would go out on their own and make without a pattern, but there are so many wonderful reasons to design your own dream sweater. In truth, sweater knitting is often as simple or complex as you want it to be, and knitting something just for you only needs to be as difficult as knitting a hat if you have something really specific in mind. I've put down a selection of some of my favorite sweater knitting resources that you can have a look at. Last but not least, making your own garments is empowering, and I hope this class helps you feel empowered. Just get started. Go forth and create fearlessly. And don't be afraid to send me a message. I love getting emails and Instagram and Ravelry messages, and I try to answer them all. I hope to see you around and see some of your sweaters too. You can find more of my work and silly little things I say at www.slow-knitting.com or on Instagram where I'm Hannibal Knits. See you around.